May I have your attention, please? Okay, so we are almost 8 minutes late, so I would like to start our convention. My name is Faruk Taban. I'm the president of Turkic-American Alliance. Okay, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome all of you to the second annual convention of the Turkic-American Alliance. It is a tremendous honor and privilege to host you on such a great day. Thank you for your participation. I am delighted to see you all here. It means a lot for our continuing commitment to serve the Turkic-American community. This year, we organized our annual convention in collaboration with TUSCON, Confederation of Businessmen and Industrialists of Turkey, and TAA member federations. I'd like to thank to each of you who has helped make this event a reality and a success. Our convention this year is entitled New Challenges and Opportunities, because our common commitments to peace, democracy, and civility are being tested at this time. We are facing these challenges and turning them into opportunities to serve peaceful transition to democracy. Change comes with uncertainty, but experience can guide transition. We can hope for a better future if we face our fears and understand the spirit of our times, which calls for uplifting human dignity. The panels in this convention call for an examination of these challenges as a means of turning them into opportunities. Sorry about that. This is my challenge today. So I'd like to, my only opportunity is cinnamon, ginger ale, and lemon. Democratization in Turkey has brought an active foreign policy in this region. Turkey's goal to promote peace in the Middle East has met various challenges. However, it has also coincided with popular demands for democratization in the area. Turkey's close collaboration with the United States is crucial for both actors to address these demands. US-Turkic partnership strengthens as Turkey's experience in democratization makes it a prominent actor. Above all, economic cooperation is at the heart of this continuing partnership. Turkey's economic growth can give us clues on how to turn economic hardships into opportunities. Lastly, the Turkic countries of Central Asia have rich energy reserves, which can be but a mixed blessings if not transported and shared wisely. Thankfully, we have brought the very best experts to guide us through these challenges and give us the magical touch or magical stick to turn them into opportunities. So I hope you brought your magical wands. If they cannot do that, I'm confident that they are going to help us overcome our fear of change and capture the spirit of our times. They combine the best of policymaking and academia in their professional lives. They have come from abroad and from DC. Their best quality is that they all share a genuine common interest to serve peace, democracy, and civility. I know this because they have accepted our invitation and they are here. So I didn't mean just panel one. We have all other three panels. with that voice, I won't be able to speak to beginning to thank them. That's another opportunity for you, I think. As Turkic-American Alliance, we are proud to bring these brilliant minds to help us understand and navigate through the new challenges we face and see the opportunities they bring. On behalf of the Turkic-American community, I thank all the distinguished panelists, moderators, speakers, and guests who have come from near and far. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Faruk Bey. Herkes günaydın. Hoş geldiniz. I'll switch back into English now. I'm Dr. Joshua Walker. I'm at the Transatlantic Fellow at the German Marshall Fund. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to our very first opening panel. I'll ask for your indulgence because what I'd like to do is Turkish relations that have a major impact on Turkish foreign policy. There are people in this town now that question the motivations, question the legitimacy of Turkey's zero problems with neighbors policy. There are many different views on Turkey today. As we speak, Vice President Biden is already in Turkey, clearly showing the importance of Turkey to the U.S. There seems to be no other topic that you can talk about with as much interest and as much relevancy today than Turkey's new foreign policy and its challenges. And we have a great set of experts from Turkey, from D.C., from different areas in terms of both elected and unelected officials who can discuss these issues with us today. So the first panelist I'd like to turn to, who's just come in from Turkey, who'll be going back to Turkey tonight, who's a household name in Turkey, who writes for one of the largest newspapers in Turkey, Abdülhamid Bilgi. Please.
Yeah, thank you, and günaydın, good morning for everyone. It is an honor for us to be with you, with these distinguished participants and speakers here. But the topic is very difficult for me to cover in a very short time, and it is also difficult because it changes, I mean, the relations between our country, between Turkey and America, is changing very rapidly. When I was here 1 year ago, it was totally different picture. So that it was post voting in UN Security Council, where Turkey voted no against US initiated resolution, and it was post flotilla case. So here it was the definition of the relations between America and Turkey was, it is in its worst times. So just 1 year ago, this was the definition. And when I turned back to Istanbul, my article was how to save Turkish-American relations. So I underlined some topics and some suggestions how to help to bridge that widening gap between two countries. But 1 year later, I am in the town again, and the definition of relations between two countries is like it is golden times of relations. So it is, I mean, first of all, it's very difficult to understand that rapid change in the perception and in the in reality. And I have clear doubts that if next time I will come to the town, what will be the mode that time? For instance, it's very likely that we could have a Congress deciding on a recognition of 1915 events as genocide, and we would have another awful, terrible times in our relations. This is very likely. And not very likely, but it's a possibility, one of the possibilities. So what I will try to do is to help understanding of how it changed from awful times to golden times, just in 1 year. So in that, I guess it is very important that there has been two changes in our relations. And one is a practical issue, which it is the NATO radar system. You know, we were debating, and America was debating for years to establish an anti-missile defense system, and one of the possibilities was to put the radar in Turkey. And this was very, as you all remember, one of the hot topics we covered during this year. And until that time, until the last decision about that topic, the famous deme, the famous topic in the media, in the Western media, was whether Turkey changing axis, you could remember those things, whether Turkey is getting Islamized, whether Turkey is drifting away from the West, or one of the topic was who lost Turkey. But when Turkey made decision to accept that NATO radar system in Turkey, all of a sudden everything changed and became very positive. Now we don't no more have such debate whether Turkey was lost or drifted away from the West. So this is very important. But the nature of the decision is very important. How it was taken is very important. It was, I guess, the details of that decision gives lots of clues on new type of relations between America and Turkey, maybe between America and New Turkey. You know, in the earlier times, those kind of strategic decisions were not democratically held or not democratically done. These were being done in closed doors, maybe negotiated, but not under the scrutiny of civilians. But this time it was under, I mean, there was very harsh negotiations, because I was in the Lisbon summit where this topic was decided. It was a NATO summit, and I was with the President Abdullah Gül. I know some of the details that how those negotiations were harsh indeed. Turkey put some conditions, asked something in return, and America, of course, asked some other things. But at the end, some of Turkey's conditions met, and there had been a consensus, and then that consensus decision was very important in our relations. This is the first factor from comparing from last year to this year. The second thing is the Arab Spring. The so-called Arab Spring, quote in quote, we don't know yet if it is spring or winter or I don't know which months of the year, but this was very important for the relations. How it became important? Now looking retrospectively, we see that both Turkey and America had very identical positions. In Egypt, in Tunisia, in Libya, Turkey had some hesitations before making his or her last decision, but in Syria now, so there are very identical positions. But can we once imagine what would happen, for instance, if Turkey continued its friendship with Assad regime despite the massacre done against the Syrian civilian population? And what would be the consequences if America sided with Egypt despite popular uprisings in Tahrir Square? So now we handled those crises, and both Turkey and America had very clear decision to take side with the people, to take side with the change, to take side with the freedom aspirations of all people in the region. So that was very important. And when I listen to our foreign policy makers, especially the top bureaucrats in the foreign ministry, they say, for instance, in my last in my last meetings, they said in the past it was very exceptional to meet between undersecretaries, the American State Department and the Turkish State Department. So, and the phrase was very interesting. It was once in a year such meeting could be possible, meeting of undersecretaries from both sides. And for that meeting, whole ministry were working to prepare themselves for, so that was that critical. But he said, one of the top diplomats in Turkish foreign ministry, now we are talking with Americans on a daily basis, sometimes 3 times. And this is not one-sided talk. This is very important, as it was the case in the NATO decision. It is not Washington telling and then Ankara is doing. This is, this is the gist of the point. So I guess this is also very important. And comparing to what was the nature of the relationship in the earlier administration's time, it was a program designed in Washington in certain circles, and then asked Turkey to follow. But in the Arab Spring, what we see, as in the critical NATO decision, Turkey and United States is working together. And this is, I guess, correct when we see the notes from the American media that Turkish leaders, be it Abdullah Gül or Recep Tayyip Erdoğan or Ahmet Davutoğlu, are the most frequently connected leaders in the world that Obama or the American administrations are talking. So this is very important. So I guess the mood changed, and now we are talking about golden times, as we were talking last year the awful times. So I guess we should talk about how we could handle or we could solve the problem of that much fluctuation. This is indeed not bearable. One year you have perfect, the other year you have very bad relations. So what could be preventions, what kind of solutions we should focus on to make relations between two countries more stable and more predictable? So I guess these things, Yeshua is warning me. Is it up?
It is up.
Okay, we'll continue from that line.
Thank you very much. I don't want to instigate a Davos-like incident where you provoke me for 1 minute. Thank you very much. I think you laid the stage very nicely, and we'll come back to some of these themes that you laid out, because I think you've kind of set the stage nicely for us. Let me turn now to somebody who has the distinct privilege or dishonor of having served in the U.S. Congress, Mike Monahan, who served from the 13th District of New York and is a close friend of both the United States and obviously of Turkey, and has just recently come back from Turkey. So maybe right where Abdulhamid left off, about the importance and kind of fluctuation in the relationship. Perhaps if you can offer some of your perspectives on how maybe people see Turkey from D.C. and maybe even from your own district and your own experiences there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joshua. And I just want to thank the folks at the Turkish-American Alliance and everyone at Tuscan who invited us here to put together this very timely and very important conference. And I'm honored to be here again with my old friend, even though he looks very young, Dr. Zagbi, and Joshua, nice to be with you. And Abdulhamid, I just want to say that you were here last year, and you saw there was a problem with relations between Turkey and America, and you went back and wrote an article about what needs to be done to repair those relations, and now we have a golden time. So I was wondering if you could go back to Turkey and write an article about how we can fix the unemployment problems in America and get the economy going, and how to prop up the euro. How to prop up the euro. Maybe we can come back in a year and once again sing your praises. I know there's a lot of distinguished guests here. I met some of the parliamentarians, so we hear from Ankara, and it's a great privilege and honor to be with them as well. I know the former Consul General Wiener is here as well. From Istanbul, so a lot of dignitaries in the crowd, and I, as a former or current politician, always have to thank everybody who brought us together. It's interesting that we did not meet and speak before joining the panel here, except to say hello to each other, and yet we all sort of came bringing, I think, the same issues and perspective. For me, too, the topic that I have prepared in my notes is the question of how is it that we are either in this golden time, or what I would call maybe an era of good feeling between Turkey, the Republic of Turkey, and the United States, how it is that we are here now, and where were we for the last 2 years. And I'd like to bring that perspective, as Joshua, as the doctor suggested, from having been on Capitol Hill during the last 2 years, during which time the sort of difficult times transpired. we do now talk about this era of good feeling. The President and the Prime Minister are on the phone quite often. And yet it's not that long ago. When I started my term in early 2009, when Israel asserted its rights to protect herself with the attacks on Gaza, and what transpired, that began, and then what went through. And I think it's important for us to remember there was the flotilla incident, there was the incident with the votes on Iran and the nuclear issues that were faced there. And it was very tense to be on Capitol Hill during that time, especially when, you know, for Americans, and our perspective is that we know that we have important friends in a difficult neighborhood, but when those friends are at odds, that is a difficult time for American foreign policy, and that's just the reality. So when Israel and Turkey got at odds, that made it a very difficult time for all politicians in this country, and especially those who are very close to either or both of those countries. And so in some ways, the American perspective was, well, wait, it seemed that for so many years, Turkey followed a foreign policy that was very much in line with its status as a NATO member, and in line with the interests as we perceive to be the American interests. Of course, what we realize is that, and now looking back, that as Turkey grew into its modern economy and its status as a regional power and player in the area in which it finds itself, there are going to be, whether you want to call them growing pains, whether you want to call them tensions, there are going to be those times that we do not always get along or we disagree. But those times have passed, and as Abdullah had said, we have to examine why is it and how have we so quickly gotten to this point of good feeling or this golden age. And certainly what we realize is that we are in a context or in a world where things have changed. And as mentioned, the Arab Spring has emerged on the scene, and clearly as the security of the region and as Turkey's security became an issue, there are many ways, I think, in which Turkey and America again realize that their mutual security is something that binds them very strongly. It's also clear that there are perils very close to Turkey's border. Syria now is on the forefront of everyone's mind, and it's quite clear that the Syria regime has to come out. I know that the Prime Minister just spoke very strongly about that yesterday as well. And then we in America perceive our #1 threat, perhaps in the world, to our security, to democracy, and to our friends and neighbors in the region as Iran. Every discussion on Capitol Hill, you should know, when it's involving foreign policy, when it's involving the budgets of our government and foreign aid and deployment of military assets, focuses on Iran, because we see Iran as the greatest threat to the security of the world, to the security of our friends and neighbors in the region, and as to the rest of the world. And so that's something that the relationship and the friendship that America has with Turkey is so important. The relationship and friendship it has with Israel is so important. And we also see Iran and Syria as severe threats to those friendships and to that mutual assured security. And so we also see that, you know, we looked at the policy. There's a lot of writings, you should know, in the American journalism as to whether or not Turkey is now embarked on a third phase of its foreign policy, having gone through the traditional, having gone through zero problems, and now into a third phase. But I think the reality is that the zero problem policy is a great goal to have, but there are times, given the nature of other actors and players on the international stage, that a different policy has to be implemented for the security of the allies who seek to, quite simply, provide a better life for themselves and for their friends and allies as well. So the time in Congress was very difficult. It was very heated. It was very hard to be on the Hill and to be a member of the Turkish caucus as I was. I am happy now that these relations have gotten better, and I think that we can all look forward to Turkey's continuing role on the world stage as a regional and world power, and as a very good and important ally of the Americans. The American people I can say we're somewhat puzzled over the last 2 years. The average person on the street in this country is not as well versed in international relations and international matters as perhaps we should be. But I think, I know in my community where there are many Turkish Americans, that the bonds are strong, and the mutual love of democracy, the respect for freedom and the respect for human rights is something that should drive the American foreign policy, the Turkish foreign policy, and the foreign policy of all like-thinking nations. So I look forward to the discussion, and I'm privileged and honored to be here.
Thank you, Mike. Let's turn now to Dr. Jim Zogby, who's the founder and president of the Arab American Institute. And for those of you that may not have become as familiar with the Arab Institute, I know particularly my Turkish American friends are always looking for models, different ways to figure out. This institution and Dr. Zogby are a perfect kind of inspiration example, since we don't like the term model when you work on Turkey, obviously. And so I turn to him for his opening statements before going back for some questions that we have. Dr. Zogby.
Thank you. I'll comment on some of what we heard, but I just want to begin with an observation from another life I live, which is that is I do polling with my brother across the Middle East, and we saw some interesting trend lines in polling that we did this summer that we released that got two headlines everywhere, but one headline only in one place, The Economist. Let me tell you about the two headlines we got everywhere. The first headline was that U.S. standing across the Middle East, across the Arab world, is lower today than it was in the last year of the Bush administration. There was, if you look at the trajectory of U.S. standing from the beginning of the Bush era, there was a steady drop down. With the election of Barack Obama, there was an immediate spike upwards, almost tripled in some countries, favorable rating. And then today, the numbers are today lower, continuing the downward trajectory. There was, in other words, an Obama bounce. There was expectations that there would be dramatic changes in the way the U.S. would relate to the region. They did not materialize, and so there's now been a sense of frustration. Barack Obama is still liked, but the sense that America can't change, won't change, doesn't change, has created this frustration. The other headline we got was that Iran, which in 2006, at the time of Israel's devastation of Lebanon and the first assault on Gaza, the Iran, I call it the Farrakhan factor, the kind of you're the guy who stands up against the guy who's oppressing us. So when Iran speaks out and Iran is viewed over and against Israel, Iran's numbers go way up. And they were. Ahmadinejad's numbers were high, Hezbollah's numbers were high. And in 2006, we saw Iran up here in rating, 60, 70, 80% favorable ratings in many Arab countries. Today, the trajectory has gone downward. Every year we poll, and every year the numbers have continued to go down. Today they're at their lowest point. What I didn't notice in the numbers, as I looked at the 2006 to 2011 numbers, I hadn't noticed what happened to Turkey. We saw that Turkey's numbers were very high. And that's what we reported, was that Turkey was the most favored nation across Arab public opinion. What we hadn't taken a look at was going back to 2006. When we'd had a plateau, Turkey's numbers from 2000 to 2006 had stayed fairly stable in the 40% range. And then in 2006 began to climb upward, 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 where today they're in the 60+% to 80+% range in all of the Arab countries where we poll. So you almost had this kind of reverse effect, Iran going down and Turkey going up at almost the same time. When the Turkey and U.S. numbers were released, there was a comment from an analyst here in Washington, somebody very close to the State Department, who sort of expressed a kind of a bewilderment. He said, "We're waiting for the Arab Spring dividend. President Obama has spoken out for Arab democracy, and yet public opinion hasn't changed." That's a common problem here in Washington. Just not understanding what the Arab Spring was about, and not understanding what the U.S.-Arab relationship was about, and why it is in trouble. I was asked by a reporter sometime after the revolts began in Egypt. She asked me, it was an NPR reporter, she said to me, if America dumped Mubarak, wouldn't our standing go up in the region? And I said, you got it backwards. We're not in trouble in Egypt because we supported Mubarak. Mubarak's in trouble in Egypt because he supported us. He supported America in Iraq. He supported America in keeping quiet, and not only keeping quiet as Israel devastated Gaza, but closing off Gaza. And what he did was become a way station on the road to rendition. And several Arab leaders were in that problem. They actually sided with America on issues that were wildly unpopular at home. As their people protested against those things, they cracked down even harder. And as the prisons filled, resentment grew, America's favorable rating dropped, and the support of Arab leaders for America in that time and support for American initiatives, the damage done during the Bush administration is almost incalculable across the board in terms of Arab public opinion. Now, I set that stage to talk about Turkey, because Turkey actually got it right. When America was getting it wrong, Turkey got it right. It understood that if it was going to move south in terms of its strategic positioning, it needed to understand where Arab sentiment was. And beginning in the display in Davos, which was an interesting kind of scenario to play out, a sort of a dramatic gesture of frustration and anger. I know American politicians well enough to know when they stage an event and when they don't. I'm not quite sure that that the president staged it, but it certainly had dividends. It was a statement that the Arab world, that resonated well with the Arab world, because it was an assertion of dignity. It was an assertion of a kind of a mass and justifiable anger at doublespeak. You cannot continue to talk this way when these kinds of atrocities are happening. And so his ratings went up. And the flotilla was the same thing. There was a sense that Turkey understood. Arab leaders who had subordinated themselves to America and who had been quiet in the face of what was going on in Gaza, there was an example. Our neighbor to the north understood and spoke out. You asked the question why the relationship shifts in the last year. It's because Arab Spring has happened. And in the context of Arab Spring, everyone is in a bit sort of wandering through this maze of a changing Arab world. I heard President Obama speak at APEC last May. He had one interesting observation that he made, a number of interesting observations, one that was especially poignant. He said to that audience, he said, in the past, Israel's been able to make peace with a leader. It now has to make peace with an entire people. It's much more difficult. Turkey understood that, and therefore understood that it needed both to protect its relationship with leaders as long as it could, and so there was a bit of meandering, with Gaddafi and with Mubarak in the beginning, and they kind of got Ben Ali a little righter than the others. But even with Assad, there was an effort in the beginning to start with, let's see if he can reform. No, he can't. They've chosen Arab people and Arab voices. Despite the meandering that appeared on the surface, they made a strategic choice. We're going to cultivate a relationship with people. In the context of that, America, which, as the policy analyst I was speaking about, still waiting for the dividend, like, we support you guys, why don't you like us? Well, we don't like you because you voted against this, you voted against that, you stand up against this. I mean, in the very context of Mubarak, the very week that Mubarak is stepping down, America's voting against the settlement resolution at the UN. There's no dividend there if you don't understand the people that you're trying to appeal to. The issue was not Mubarak leaving, it was standing up in the face of an issue that is very near and dear to the heart of most Arabs. So in that sense, Turkey's become an invaluable ally. America does have a tremendous interest in this coming out right. We don't know where it comes out. When you say you don't know what month it is, it's November, but that doesn't mean much because we don't know. Tunisia seems on the right track. Libya, I don't know where it's going. Egypt, I have confidence in the end is going to come out okay, although I've said before that the best I think we can hope for with Egypt might be Turkey 30 years ago, with the military in control of several aspects of governance, but space created for a democratic process that 30 years from now will produce some, maybe 20 years from now produce some more interesting change. I think the revolt will continue. I don't expect, other than this terrible disaster that's unfolding in Yemen. I don't really expect other countries to explode in a real sense, but I think a transition process is underway. Certainly in Morocco, I think we'll see some change in Algeria, etc. What is different is that Arab voices now matter. Arab opinion matters. America has to pay attention, but almost can't, for two reasons. One is the inability, the lack of flexibility that the American political process provides for a president to make change. President Obama came to office with all the right intentions, but runs into a situation where at the end of a 2.5-year process, the Israeli prime minister comes to the White House, wags his finger, and insults the president at the White House, and 2 days later is hosted in Congress and gets 29 standing ovations from both sides of the aisle. Something that left people in the Arab world, and I'd say across the world, scratching their head. What kind of country you guys got? I mean, what is the thinking here? In that situation, where our ability to act is so limited, Turkey becomes the invaluable ally. That without changing its view and without changing its position on Gaza or on Palestinians or its anger with Netanyahu and its policy, has said, we can help ease through this transition. We can help deal with some of the issues in Syria that you can't deal with. I mean, when I hear Republicans, candidates for president, arguing with Obama saying that you ought to do this in Syria, you ought to do that in Syria, in effect not having learned a damn lesson from the Bush failures or from the problems of the last year. What we have is a President Obama who says, there is no space for us to take the lead. We will, in effect, lead from behind, but now we've got an ally, Turkey, who can do some of the things that we can't do to kind of bring a situation under control, or at least create some movement here in the direction in which we'd like to see the situation move. Turkey can interface with the Arab League, America can't. Turkey can interface with Iran. At this point, America can't. Turkey can play a leadership role in trying to create space with the Syrian opposition. Syrian opposition dares not meet with American leadership in the same way. It would undercut their credibility at home. And so I think that's what accounts for the shift. Not so much that Turkey's changed as much as America has come to realize it needs somebody as a partner in a changing Middle East that has the as we'd say in American slang, that's got the street creds to operate in the region, and its street creds earned during that period when the relationship was sour. And I will stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Zogby. I know there's a lot you want to respond to in terms of it, but let me start with a kind of a general question in a sense here. In Washington, as we just heard, there's a time lag between kind of something that happens and the reaction that comes. One of the things that's been interesting to watch as someone who's been working on Turkey for 10 years is kind of people suddenly discovering Turkey, suddenly realizing that Turkey has all the right characteristics that might be the invaluable ally Dr. Zogby lays out. One of the questions now that many people in Turkey seem to be having, and given that you've just come from Turkey, I want to get your perspective on this. Some people might make the argument that the fact that Prime Minister Erdogan has suddenly been transformed into a global leader, the fact that he just was on all of the Time magazine as the main leader, and this delikanlı that the Turks love so much, the charisma that he has, seems to be translating as the most popular leader in the Middle East. That might be going to Turkish leadership's head, and people are concerned within Turkey, and you hear that reflected here. Is there something about Turkish hubris that we need to be careful of, and friends of Turkey on the outside should be helping with? And how does that translate when it comes to the interlinked linkages between domestic Turkish politics and the kind of the unrivaledness of the AKP looking towards 2023, and also what that means in terms of its foreign policy. Because much like we've heard in terms of the Obama administration, when it comes to foreign policy, the AKP seems to be on the right side of history each time. Is there a translation here on the domestic, and what does that mean for places like Syria that have been so important for Turkish foreign policy moving forward?
In Turkey, the rise of Prime Minister Erdogan was never easy. So he has used to outside pressures, internal pressures from media, from judiciary, from establishment, from various sources. So that made him indeed a powerful person, because when you resist all those pressures, all those tricks, then you became a real leader, tested in many fields. So this is a strength. And in Turkey, yes, both in Turkey and abroad, there are two stories about what's happening in Turkey. The one is Turkey is getting authoritarian more and more. Or some people putting it like that. Turkey is replacing one kind of authoritarianism with another one. So those kind of statements or media coverage we are very much used to for several years, not for time being. And you can argue about those things, but and it's very difficult to get a fair judgment from within Turkey, because Turkey is very polarized, and when you, irrespective of who you are talking to, would have a different angle of the story. So I think it's very valuable to, in this angle, to trust the objective or the fairly objective observers' attitude or evaluation of the situation. So in that regard, I see that the European Union's approach is very important. You know, they are writing progress reports to evaluate the situation in Turkey, whether Turkey is Islamized or not, whether Turkey is getting a better democracy or not, whether Turkey is rising human rights standards or not. I mean, all issues. You know, America is not dealing maybe in that manner with what's happening in Turkey at very detailed level, in the courts, in the environment, in the police, in the prisons. Everything is covered by EU, and those reports, the EU progress report, are very valuable. And when you look at those reports, and when you talk to European observers of what's happening in Turkey towards the EU, is Turkey getting closer in terms of democratic standards, closer to EU, or getting away? For instance, when I advise, I know that in Washington people have little time, people are very busy, but this report is around 100 pages something. It would be very valuable for any observer who is interested in what's happening in Turkey to read those reports. Those reports are available in the Turkish EU ministry and the, of course, European Union websites. So it's very objective description. They are critical of Turkey in some senses, but they are also applauding in some regards. So when I, for instance, personally talk to people from European Commission, they say that in 10 years comparison, so Turkey of 2000 and Turkey of 2011, it is like day and night. So there is that big change, radical change. But when you look at detailed things, I mean, when you omit or neglect the forest and focus on the trees, you would have the danger of losing the perspective. So this is the dilemma. So we see that in, for instance, the foreign news coverage of Turkey. The same week that Time made the cover of Erdogan, The Economist, which is another Western, very serious reference news outlet, made an article very critical of Turkey, as if they are talking about different Turkeys. So it's very important to know, first, to go to objective evaluations, and the second, to look at in perspective. So people, or for instance, journalists the people who belong to minorities were assassinated 10 years ago or 5 years ago. But now we don't have those kind of things. Now it's very clear that we don't have torture in Turkish prisons, but it was the case in 90s. So there are very important progress. But is it enough? Of course not. And in terms of Turkish people's desire, which makes me optimistic and hopeful, for instance, we made, as news agency, we made a public poll just last month, asked people what is their desire for a new constitution. The support was 87%. You know, and the last mini package referendum was passed by the approval of 58% of Turkish people. And when there was kind of quasi-coup d'etat against the Erdogan's government in 2007, people supported with 47%. So, I mean, it is not an elite project imposed on people without their acceptance. It is something coming from bottom, not from top down, from down to top. So this is very, very important, but of course Turkey had a very clear problem of opposition. The third time the ruling party is winning by increasing the amount of support. So this is indeed a historic record for Turkish democracy, and it's a big challenge for the opposition. And indeed, I mean, for Turkish democracy to better function, you should have a reliable ruling party, but you should have the powerful, legitimate opposition to resist and to be another alternative. In Turkey, we don't have that, but some people are putting the blame for that on the ruling party, which is not sensible.
Yeah. Thank you. In the Middle East has come at this time is because of a lack of U.S. leadership, and there's a vacuum. And it was ironic that on the day that the U.S. announced the withdrawal of troops from Iraq, Turkey was going into Iraq because of a PKK terrorist attack, the worst that had happened in over 4 years. How does this perception, at least, particularly whether it's true or not, in the region, there's a feel that the U.S. is on the decline. You can see it everywhere in terms of kind of people's responses and what Dr. Zogby talked about in terms of the Israeli Prime Minister really kind of showing up Obama on his own home turf in many ways. Many people would argue that Obama, as he goes into the next election, the reason there's not going to be much discussion about foreign policy, there's not much to criticize on his level because of the fact that under his presidency, you've seen, Osama bin Laden killed. You can't call him soft on terrorism, and all these different said in terms of being an invaluable ally. What can we do and work together in the same way that we've never seen a closer working relationship between a U.S. president and a prime minister. We've seen our people never see each other in the same light, as you've pointed out. What can be done about this, and how do you see that in terms of the interlinkage?
If we step back for a minute and didn't finger point and didn't name call, not that anyone is doing that here, and didn't discuss who did what, but kind of look at what are our mutual and shared goals in the region of the Middle East and in the world. As I said, and I talked about sort of the current situation in this country of where we stand with certain countries and where there are certain tensions that seem unsolvable, that they can't be fixed. What we need to figure out is how do we get to a world where there's peace in the Middle East, where we solve the problem of the tensions between Israel and its neighbors, the wars, the tensions too easy of a word. How do we solve the problem in Syria? Syria, it's not talked about that much, but Syria has, I think, the largest stockpile, one of the largest stockpiles of chemical and biological weapons in the world, and that's sitting in a place now that's extremely difficult. We talk about Iran, and we in America are very concerned about Iran. But how do we get to a place where we find peace in this region and in the greater world? And there's no question that Turkey's role in doing that is becoming more and more clear to the American government and to the American people. And I think Dr. Zogby said it right with the American colloquialism that Turkey has gained a certain amount of street credibility because for us in America it is a democracy. Human rights are respected there. And as Abdul Ahmed said, that the government that exists now is through a democratic process. So in our eyes, there is that credibility. At the same time, Turkey has taken positions that are not always in line with what Americans think or what Americans want. But at the end of the day, Turkey stands by its principles and moves forward and has been able to make that bridge into these different worlds. And so Americans have to be more supportive of Turkey's efforts to do that. People in Turkey have to understand as well that America, is a democracy, and therefore it means that it is not, the most efficient form of government, and it means that sometimes the foreign policy that is directed is difficult for a president, as was said by the doctor, because there's a Congress that you have to deal with, and there is a system that does not always make it that clear. A president cannot act out a policy solely on his own or her own, and so that's a problem for America to face as well. America, I do not believe, that they talk about America on the decline. I do not believe that, and I can't kind of sit and, abide by that. But America has to realize that its future lies in regional partnerships with the democracies in those regions that can then formulate a better world for people all around the world. And a key player in that, certainly in this region of the world that we're talking about, is Turkey. And that's why Turkey's foreign policy moving forward is so important, not only for the people of the people of the region, but for the people of the United States of America as well. And I would submit that there have been changes in that foreign policy as we see it from America, because it has matured, understanding that it is a reflection of conditions and contexts in the world as they exist, to which a country like the Republic of Turkey applies its values, which rise to the top through the democratic process, and thus you have a foreign policy based on international law, sort of a process-defined policy and a reality-defined policy, and that's something that is critical, that Turkey continue, that its leadership stay on focus and on track, and that America realize that it has a good partner in Turkey, and Turkey can help America bridge some divides that perhaps it cannot bridge on its own.
I realized even before you were talking, I had already elevated you to a former New York Senator, Moynihan. So, Mahan, thank you for your comments on that. Let me talk to Dr. Zogby about this. You do a lot of polling, and you have a lot, I'm sure, to respond to what's been said. But the feeling that you're describing in the Arab world, this is one piece of the larger equation, and you kind of laid out the polls where a lot of people in this town would simplify the discussion by saying, okay, well, obviously Turkey and Iran are going to be balancing each other. The Arab world has no agency. But one of the regional balance in this region is really not between Turkey and Iran per se, but also the other kind of constellation in the Arab world of kind of the status quo, Saudi Arabia, and the force. What does that mean for kind of Turkey in this region? And also, can you speak to what Abdul Hamid was talking about? If we had come to discuss Turkish foreign policy any other time, the first discussion we normally one of these, banana, what does it matter to me? The discussion happened. The EU has made its comments. Turkey's big enough. And one of the things I always like to joke about is that the EU ministry, Turkey's rising economic strength in many ways, there is that feeling among some nationalists. How is that seen from the region, and also how will that affect the U.S. Relationship with Turkey?
Well, that's a number of questions. And I just have a couple observations that I could make. The first, I just want to comment on the hubris issue in two ways. One is here. Turkey's favorable ratings are high now, but cannot be taken for granted, because those favorable ratings are derivative. They're not earned, and can evaporate quickly. I tell the Palestinians, for example, when Abu Mazen was first elected president, we did a poll. His favorable ratings in America were 56%. His unfavorable rating was 16%. 6 years later, his favorable rating is 17%. His unfavorable is 53%. He doesn't deserve the 53% unfavorable, but he didn't deserve the 56% favorable. It was derivative. He wasn't Arafat. That was why he got 56%. And now he's viewed as standing in the way of our only democratic ally in the Middle East. And so that's what happens, is that a publicity machine has destroyed him where it once built him up, like an American politician in the same way. Turkey's today riding high, but if Turkey doesn't do work to earn its rating, I mean, you can't piggyback on the fact that Obama works with you. You can't piggyback in the old days on the fact that Israel was campaigning for you. No one is campaigning for you now. You have to campaign for yourself. Turkey needs to make its case in America and have Americans know Turkey and know Turkish Americans. You folks are in a critical position to help do that, and should do that. Secondly, in the Arab world, there's a danger, I think. I mean, I'm reading, you know, articles, the new Ottomanism, you know, kind of thing. That's nonsense. It's nonsense. Both because I don't think it's Turkey's goal. I think Turkey fainted south in order to move back north. I mean, Turkey's goal is EU, not the Arab League. They don't want to join, nor do they, I think, want to take it over. But also understand, Arabs don't want you to take over the Arab League. It's the Arab League. And so there is an issue here that I think needs to be understood. When we poll and we say who's currently leading the way in the Middle East, they say Turkey. When we ask questions that, in effect, respond to this issue, who do you want to lead? They want Egypt. Arabs want Egypt to come back. They see Egypt as the natural leader. And I think to your question about the partnership, that would be a critical partnership. Egypt is the hinge that connects two continents. Turkey is the door that opens into the third continent. And so this partnership, I think, is a critical one. And while Turkey spends its time in Syria, it need not be diverted. Syria is an absolutely central country, not only in the fact that it was sort of created in the center, with, you know, sort of the serious falling apart would have very serious consequences, not just in Turkey, in Iraq, in Jordan, in Lebanon as well. And so I think Turkey's right to spend time there, but it cannot lose its eye on the prize, which is Egypt. And I thought that the visit of the Prime Minister to the Arab League and his message, while, you know, some in the Muslim Brotherhood movement sort of reacted negatively to that, it's a message that needs to be repeated. There needs to be chiding of the military and chiding of the Brotherhood. Egypt needs to find a new way, and Turkey provides that new way. It can be a model. I thank you for flattering us with a model role, but I think Turkey provides a model role that needs to be looked at. And should Egypt emerge from this, and I believe that it ultimately will. The question is how long does it take? I hope sooner than later. A Turkish-Egyptian partnership, both in terms of the demographics and in terms of the potential, can be quite critical. I'm not worried about the Gulf states, and I'm not seeing them as hostile or look. Everybody's got their interests, and they've got their interests, and they are not so much retarding Arab Spring as they are sort of inoculated against Arab Spring or from an Arab Spring. When we poll, there's no demand for change in the Gulf states. There just isn't. Bahrain's a unique case. Bahrain's the only country in the Gulf region where the cab driver who picks you up at the airport's a Bahraini. I mean, there aren't jobs in Bahrain. There isn't wealth in Bahrain. There is this demographic problem of discrimination against the Shia majority that is real, that is a problem Bahrain has to solve. But Bahrain is not Saudi, and it's not UAE, and it's not Qatar, and it's not Oman. Kuwait's its own world. It's got its own problems to deal with. But there is a legitimacy that the families have everywhere but Bahrain, that's real. No one questions that the descendants of Sheikh Zayed, the founder, and the family. These are tribal cultures yet. They're still tribal cultures. No one questions that the descendants of Abdulaziz. Are there excesses? Is there a need for accountability? Is there a need for transparency in spending in funds? Absolutely. But there isn't the same issue that Americans would like to see. And so I think that the president gets it right. The issue is human rights. The issue is not democracy in the Gulf. The issue is that these countries need to be protecting human rights. They need not to be imprisoning people. They need to be opening up their political culture. They need to be more respectful of personal freedoms. But no one, I think, at this point in time is questioning the legitimacy of the families and their roles. Different in Jordan, but in the Gulf states where you've got this tribal culture, the fact is that there's a pact, the social pact, and the social pact operates that the descendants of Abdulaziz are the tribe. Will that change? Sure it will. But look, these countries are 50 years old. 50 years ago, people were living in tents and in mud. Riyadh was 35,000 people in the 1950s. 35,000 people. And today it's 4.5 million. That rapid urbanization and the process of modernization that has caught hold has created a bit of a pulling back from change in the culture. Same in several of the other states. So I think we leave that out of the discussion and look at the Levant and North Africa. That's where change is occurring, and we have to focus on. And the Saudis will, and the Gulf states will be partners to the degree to which it meets their needs. And where it doesn't meet their needs, they'll coalesce as they have and try to, tamp down and control. But they're not as concerned with Syria. They're not, in other words, Syria becoming a democracy doesn't threaten the Saudi system at all. There's no apples and oranges there. So I think I'll just leave it there.
All right, so we have about 20 minutes left, or maybe a little bit less, for some questions. And so I'm going to ask the audience members who have questions. I see Sharon right over there, so if we can get a mic right over to the former Consul General.
Comment as well. He talks about the golden age in relations between the U.S. and Turkey that exists right now. I would note that I think that's a golden age in government-to-government relations between the two countries. And I think it's important to note the distinction. Jim mentioned, for example, that public opinion is more anti-American in the Middle East in general now than even at the end of the Bush administration. And I know your polling is primarily in the Arab countries, but I think the same numbers apply in Turkey. So what we have is a situation where you have a golden age in government-to-government relations with public opinion that is as negative as it's ever been. And it seems to me if there's any one lesson of the Arab Spring, it's the danger of interpreting the nature of your relationship based on government-to-government relations and ignoring what public opinion is underneath that. Excellent. Especially in a country like Turkey where the current leadership is very much populist. So it seems to me that just as Jim says that Turkey can't take its high ratings in the United States for granted, it seems to me that this disconnect between the government-to-government relations in Turkey right now and what Turkish public opinion thinks about the United States is, to me, a fundamental destabilizing piece of this golden picture. And I would be interested in your views, primarily Abdulhamit's views, but others, about what does this imply in terms of what we need to do and what Turkey needs to do.
With your permission, let me get one more question so that way we can open it up and so we have more opportunities. We'll have right up here in the front row.
If I introduce myself, Idris Bal, Professor of International Relations. My name is Idris Bal. I am Professor of International Relations, member of Turkish Parliament, and member of Foreign Relations Committee in Turkish Parliament. I have short questions to all speakers. First of all, Mr. Bilici was talking about stabilizing Turkish-US relations if someone study on Turkish-U.S. relations, he or she will discover that these relations based on security issues. If you have any other suggestions, I will be happy to hear them. Secondly, my question is to Mr. McMahon. Is there any possibility to have decision in Security Council in United Nations regarding Syria, and how can we assess position of Russia and China? And do you think that domestic dynamics or Turkish and Arabic pressure enough to change regime in Syria? And lastly, my question is to Mr. Zogby. In the Middle East, like Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Jordan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll start here and go right in the order we came in.
Yeah, I thank both questions because Turkish reach in the public, in American public, was very poor. As you served in Turkey, American reach in Turkey, Turkish public is very poor. And it's very evident in Pew findings that, I mean, there should be lots of investment in that regard. But I'm happy in the states, in the town, counties, so this is very important, and this organization, I guess, realized the gap very well, and they are doing very well. And the second thing you raised, Professor Bal, is the economic aspect, which is, I mean, for many years in Turkish-American relations, I mean, it is not just at the biggest company levels, but at small and medium-sized company levels. In that regard, TUSCOM's effort, I mean, which is, I guess, representing more than, Ahmet Bey, ne kadar?
Associations?
Yeah, how many members you have?
5,000.
35,000 members of businessmen now supporting that event. Give me that opportunity, because this is the most important remaining gap in the relations between two countries, because there is a democratization. You know, in the earlier times, we had used to the notion that the administrative promise may not be delivered because Turkey is also a democracy. That's good. And both, I mean, the relations are democratized. But the gap is there. We have already, I mean, the relationship economically with economic power to do that, as opposed to past. Thank you.
Representative McMahon.
Thank you very much. I too want to thank you for the questions because they help closing, sort of my closing thoughts as well, and they're actually very similar. And I'll tell just a few quick stories. When I came to this room here, especially a shout out to my friends from Brooklyn and Staten Island, New York, who I represented, they were very active with me even when I was in. It is true, many decisions are made here because of local politics. That's the way democracy works. You know the expression, or you should know it, and certainly the parliamentarians know it, that all politics is local. And so the local efforts of the people in this room are very important in establishing how important a friendship and how strong the relationship needs to continue to be between the United States and Turkey. Battle over a resolution up on Capitol Hill, which is quite frankly, I will say, not in the best interest of America's foreign policy, but it is local politics bubbling up to the surface, and that's that you see in New York City. And the best bid to do that, in my opinion, and so many people's opinion, came from a Turkish company, Karzan. It was to actually do some of the assembling of the cars, which, if you understand the American economy, is almost unheard of and would be wonderful, right, to have those jobs and to have those manufacturing jobs. But I was fortunate enough to go to Turkey last month with my wife, and we did a lot of traveling, and quite often we're off by ourselves. And it's clear to see when I walk down the street that I'm an American. I think if you're Turkish, there's no question about that. But the response we got from people both in the cities and in the countryside was very warm. And so I came home with the feeling that no matter what our governments do, that there is a warm feeling in Turkey of the American people. And it's really incumbent on both sides for us to continue to work at the people-to-people level to make sure that that continues. So no matter how much our governments screw up, and I say that in tongue-in-cheek as it's printed somewhere, that we, the people, remain in contact and continue to do that. And I think that that is something that we have to do for ourselves and for our children as well, to make sure that the bonds between our country remain strong. Lastly, to the question about the United Nations. The United Nations and the Security Council sometimes is very much like the United States Senate, where a minority vote or a vote of one can block a policy that has to go forward. So whether or not we can convince China and Russia to see the rightness in our mutual understanding that the current government in Syria has to be replaced, that the people have to be given a voice, and because of the security issue that it poses, not only to itself, if there were civil war, but to the region and to the world, we have to continue that fight. So if it continues to be blocked in the Security Council, we have to remain committed to bring about the positive change in that region, in that country.
Dr. Zogby?
I just want to take that issue on the Security Council question. You're right. The vote of one country can block, and in a couple dozen cases, the U.S. has been the...
And I knew you, as I said it, I knew you were going to bring that back, but we're talking, I thought we were talking about Turkish, Turkish foreign policy.
We were talking about the UN, and I think that is one of the problems, obviously, that we're dealing with here, is the fact that the veto of the 5 standing members can do this. But let me make, I'm usually loath to suggest what other countries ought to do with their foreign policy, and yet I think that I would like to be critical of Turkey right now and offer a suggestion. I think Turkey plays a critical role in providing a door between diverse points of view. It tried to negotiate between Syria and Israel. It tried with Brazil to create an alternative to confrontation with Iran, and I think made some real progress there, although it wasn't listened to. It tried initially with Syria. I think it gave up too soon. And I would like to caution that before Turkey goes too far down this dark road of cornering itself with regard to insisting on change, it ought to consider the fact that you don't really want to call for change when you don't know what the change is going to look like. You're going to have to live with the consequences of this, and more so than the United States will. And so I think that Syria is an enormous concern. This regime has lost legitimacy, clearly, in the region it has. It still has legitimacy at home. Understand that. And I think you do. I think Turkey does. Turkey does understand that to some degree. That there are those who've lost their fear of the regime, and they're demonstrating courageously and are they exhilarate us with their fearlessness in the wake of the brutal onslaught of the regime. But there are also those who aren't demonstrating because they're also afraid. They're afraid of change. They're afraid of what happens when the bath goes. And as I've said in a sort of a weak, but I still like the pun, don't throw the baby out with the bath. Syria is a pluralistic society, and there are Christians in Syria who look at Iraq next door and say, God forbid. And there are Shia and there are Alawi in Iraq who are equally afraid of. There are those in Damascus who are living a fairly good middle-class, upper-middle-class life, who are fearful of this rural-urban conflict that they see brewing in the future. And so Syria has a real problem. And I think the regime has handled it badly. I think that their behavior has been deplorable. But I think Turkey's initial effort, which was try to find a way to create a negotiated process forward, is still the way. because a civil war in Syria, if this goes on much longer, we're going to have a civil war. And a civil war in Syria is in no one's interest, certainly not Turkey's and certainly not anyone in the Arab side. The numbers who've died will increase tenfold. The kind of barbarity that we saw in Lebanon, that we saw in Iraq, that we saw in Sarajevo can unfold right next door. And no one will be immune from that. And so the need to kind of back away from the ultimatum, not to give the regime any space, but also not to so embolden the opposition, which let's understand. I mean, look, I love these guys. They're not ready for prime time. They can't govern Syria right now. And the question is, who is going to govern Syria? And so somehow a transition period, we have to see our way through to a transition period, and that transition period has to come about through negotiations. I grant you that the regime has been gross in its behavior and sort of is like the Bulgarian Party 1955. I mean, they are ideologically rigid. But somehow we have to help create a situation where they are softened up to see the need to sit down and talk, and a transition period and a transition process in negotiations with the opposition. Can't be foreign intervention. Turkey cannot sort of create a buffer space. You don't want to send your troops into Syria. Believe me, you don't. And so we have to think of an alternative to the current path we're on, because no one's going to win. And just one quick question on what's to account for the Arab Spring. Decayed, ossified, kleptocratic leadership that had lost the legitimacy with its people, in part because of policies they pursued in foreign policy, in part because of policies they pursued in domestic policy, an enormous youth bulge that produced terrible unemployment. An educated, elite, unemployed youth is a danger in any country. The guys who made the Arab Spring in Egypt were not the Muslim Brotherhood, and they were not the poor. They were upper middle class educated elites who found their path forward blocked and could not access any further progress. And so they took to the streets and they found the hungry waiting for them. The problem in Egypt is that part of the revolution won and then immediately was hijacked by others. And so we don't know where it's going right now. The bus is careening wildly down the street. But I'm fairly confident that at the end of the day, this is going to work out. The question is just how long is that end of the day going to be? But I wanted to make those comments about Syria, if you don't mind.
So I know we have lots of other questions that are remaining, but we're already over the time, and we're about to start the next panel in less than 10 minutes. I just wanted to make a quick note that they asked me to, which was to have, if you're registered for the lunch, can you go pick up your registration? Those of you that have questions, I'm sorry, I've been asked that the panel needs to stop here, so if you want to approach and talk to them individually. But I want to have everybody join us in thanking the excellent panel this morning. Thank you.